So it's pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about today in the next few weeks, I guess. And I'm really looking forward to doing that. And I just wanted to share this as well. So in the past years, we've done a pledge drive around now. We haven't done that for the past couple of years, for better or for worse, and I don't know which that is. And so just as we're present to this subject for the next 3 weeks, I just want to mention this. So what we're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks is not tied to a specific ask. So in 3 weeks, we're not going to hand you a card and ask you to write down a figure about what you think you'll be able to give next year. And I want to mention that just so we're not waiting for that shoe to drop, and that maybe we can just together be present to this conversation about our money and our faith. And I think it's a pretty important conversation, because as people that are engaged in looking to traverse the spiritual path, the spiritual life, we have the things that we're engaged with. We do our sits, we walk our labyrinths, we walk the beach, we practice our yoga and our tai chi and all of the things that we do. We go to our justice ministry meetings. And so we have this over here. And then there's this huge chunk of life that we're engaged with out of at least seemingly necessity, and probably necessity, what we do with our finances, what we do with our money, how we make it, how we use it, how we save it, how we give it, how we're going to provide for our retirement years for some of us. For others of us, we're not there yet. We're trying to figure out how we're going to send our kids to college. And takes up a large amount of energy in our life. And for most of us, most of the time, not to generalize, those two things are pretty separate. And what if we could at least nudge them together a little bit closer? So that this that takes up so much time and energy in our life, we're able to engage and to practice our spiritual journey with as well. So today we're going to talk about money and us individually and money and us together. Next week we're going to talk about the lie of scarcity and the story of abundance and sufficiency. And then in 2 weeks we're going to talk about how do we practice faith, mercy, and justice in community with our money. And not just our money individually, but our money that we hold together and try our best to faithfully steward as First Congregational Church of Lake Worth. So Lynn Twist, in her book, The Soul of Money, tells the story of a group of indigenous people deep in the forest of the Amazon called the Akuar people, who didn't have any contact with the outside world until the 1970s. So these were people for whom money was a completely foreign idea. They had no use for it. They took care of one another. If someone had a good hunt, it was shared with the community. If two people came together in marriage, then the family of the groom and the family of the bride would come together and build them a house in which to live. They didn't need this symbol, this currency. And then in the 1970s, they were reached by white missionaries, and so had their first contact with the outside world. And soon after that first contact with the missionaries, the oil companies came and were interested in the oil that was under their land. And there were others that were interested in the hardwood that was growing in their land. And so they had the wherewithal. These were people that looked at dreams all the time, and they started having dreams that eventually they were going to have to engage the outside world. And by this time, they had seen what could happen with other tribes and money. Tribes that received a certain amount of money that was new to them, that was gone in a moment, and the resources of their land were completely wiped out. So they started to educate themselves about what money is and how it's used out of necessity. And so they were able to set up systems and programs to help them engage with the outside world. And they ended up creating a foundation, the Pakama Foundation. And part of that is a lodge that's right there in their land, where people can come in and stay in their midst, in the rainforest, in the Amazon, and experience and engage what that's like. And it's a way for them to earn the money that they need, so they don't have to give away the rights to their resources. Money is a necessity of life. Money, however, to use a phrase that we've all heard and many of us use, dads, I'm looking at you, money does not grow on trees. And I want us to think about that differently than how we usually think about that and why that's usually uttered, but to recognize the fact that money does not grow on trees. Money isn't something that happens naturally. It's not part of the cosmos. It's something that we have created. So we created something that kind of is a tool in our work, in our desire to exchange goods and services with one another. And a useful tool it is. But it's something that we created. You know, I think that's what Jesus was getting at in this gospel story this morning. So the Pharisees, who, as Nelson reminded us, we always like to villainize the Pharisees. The Pharisees were folks like me and like you. They were the good religious folks. They were the folks that were trying as best as they could to get this right, to connect their spirituality with everyday life. And the Gospels reflect, and we kind of took the bait on that, these teachings as gotcha moments. And maybe they were somewhat, but if we can step back from that a little bit and see these stories as Jesus conveying wisdom about how to best live, what works well. And so we're told that the Pharisee asked, should we pay taxes? And trying to trip Jesus up and playing to the crowds, because there's obviously two ways that Jesus could answer that, yes or no. If he said yes, then the people of Israel, the occupied people of the area, were going to get mad at him and say, why should we pay taxes to this occupying empire? And if Jesus said no, then the occupying empire was going to get ticked off at him and say, what do you mean you're telling people not to pay taxes? But Jesus, as Jesus always does, answers with such subtlety and such wisdom. Whose picture is on the coin? And of course, they respond that the emperor's picture is on the coin. And Jesus' response is, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God. So, a recognition on Jesus' part that everything that we have and the resources that we enjoy and appreciate, everything is in a flow from the divine coming through us and back to the divine in a constant cycle and in a constant flow. But we also live in the, quote, real world, don't we? Where there's retirement to plan for and kids to send to school and taxes to be paid. I think what Jesus is saying here is remember that everything comes from God for us to use and enjoy and utilize in a flow that goes back to God and comes through us again. But also realize that there are realities of life and that we have to touch this money in order to take care of ourselves and to take care of others, to facilitate the everyday life that we know and experience. The problem comes when we take this useful tool, this tool that we use to get what we need and give what we need and take care of one another, and make it our God. I think maybe Jesus recognized that, and if it was true then, it's 100 times more true today. We've taken this created tool and made it what's prime. We've taken something which we can use to serve ourselves, and it has become what we've served, what we hoard, what we use not to help, but to oppress. It's become something that has caused us to enslave whole groups of people. It's become something that causes us to completely plunder the earth and to destroy it, to have more of this money. We've used it to subject one another and to subject genders and to have whole countries produce goods for us because having them do it saves us a few dollars while they live in squalid conditions. So what do we do with that? Money is for us. It's a tool that we have the power and the authority, and if we choose, the wherewithal to use for good and not for harm. It's kind of hard to think about that sometimes because we're told that this is what is, and this is the way things are, and this is the way things will always be. But we do have some choice in the matter. I think one of the things that's really important, and hopefully we'll all have the opportunity to do this over the next 3 weeks, is to really think about what our story of money is. How do we relate to it? How do we use it? How do we think about it? We all come from some sort of money story, and it's different based on what our generation is. I know many people present this morning grew up with parents that experienced the Great Depression. And so that gave us some pretty concrete ideas about what money is and how easily it can all go away. It kind of develops a mindset of scarcity. Also, during the Great Depression, there grew a great appreciation of what it means to take care of one another. And even if money and resources are slim, there's still the possibility of taking care of one another. Others of us grew up in the 70s and 80s, and our parents weren't quite sure about what to do with money and how to best use it. Some of us grew up in homes of great affluence and comfort. Others grew up in homes that didn't have as many resources as they would like. A personal story for me is money growing up for me was tied to food. Big surprise there. And I remember we didn't have a great deal of money growing up, and we actually had a refrigerator and freezer for a large chunk of my elementary school years that didn't work really well, and we couldn't keep ice cream in the freezer because it would melt. And it was about that time that pints of Häagen-Dazs or Häagen-Dazs, which is it, Richmond? Häagen-Dazs became popular. They were only $1. I remember this so clearly. They were only $1.25 at the time. And I remember on a Friday night kind of looking around our house to see if we could scrounge up $1.25 so we could drive to the 7-Eleven to buy a pint of ice cream that we could all eat in one sitting so it didn't have to go in the freezer. All of us have stories, have experiences like that inform our understanding and engagement with money. Money can be what we choose for it to be. Money is a symbol, it's a tool, and it so often carries the weight of what we're feeling and experiencing. Lynn Twist was a fundraiser, and she talked about the time when she started doing that work, and she had 2 places to be in one day. She had already set up a time to go and talk to a group in Harlem. The group that she worked with did things for hunger, helped hunger, the belief that hunger could be eradicated around the world. And so she was going to speak to a church group in Harlem, New York. And she was doing that in the afternoon, and then in the morning there was an urgent call that came from Chicago about a CEO that was looking to donate money. So she remembers getting up that morning and trying to dress to impress for that Chicago trip. And so she flew to Chicago and met with this CEO of a big food processing conglomerate who had run into some trouble and scandal lately in their company and was looking for some quick fixes to deal with that and get some good publicity. So they wanted to give money to her organization. And so she went to his office up a couple of different elevators to the top of a tall building in downtown Chicago. And she went through her spiel, and it was like he was just looking right through her, not even paying attention. So she came to the end of her presentation. He opened up a drawer and pulled out a check that was already prepared and signed for $50,000 and slid it across to her and really didn't say anything else. So she wasn't quite sure how to feel about that, but she was a fundraiser after all. And so she put the $50,000 check in her purse, thanked him, and left and flew to New York to speak to the group in the basement of a church in Harlem. And so she talked to that group about the work that she did, and they just had rapt attention. And then she wasn't even sure if she should make the ask at the end of that presentation, because these are people that are living at poverty level themselves. And yet she did and invited them to be involved. And there was quiet for a moment. And then one lady stood up and came to the front. Her name was Esther. And she says, "Oh my goodness, that was just such an incredible presentation. I see money is water that flows. And for some folks, it flows a lot. For me, not so much. I'm not sure why, but it's always just been a trickle. But she said, I loved what you say. I love what you're doing. And so I want to give you this money. She took $50 out of her purse that was in 5s and 1s. She says, I made this money by taking in wash. And I want you to have it. I don't have checks or credit cards. But I want this to flow to you in the work that you're doing. So Lynn took that. And then others started coming forward and doing the same. She said it became kind of like a worship service. And she said at the end of that, there was about $500 in small bills. And yet there were tears in her eyes from that experience. And she went home that night and she took the $50,000 check from the CEO and just wrote a note and said, thank you for this, but we want to work with people that are truly engaged in the work that we're doing. And she sent that check back. Never heard anything else from him except for years later when they re-engaged, and he wrote and he said, of everything that happened to me in my career, that's what I remembered. And he ended up being engaged fully with the work of this organization. See, our money carries with it what we put into it. There's so much that we can use it for and do as we practice our spiritual lives. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, Jason, that sounds good, but I don't have it. I don't have any money to use. We all have something that we can use. And we can make choices, even in what we buy, how we direct our dollars. That's what we're going to be talking about over the next couple weeks. You received an envelope as you came in today, and I'm going to ask you to open that. This is a little different than what it says we're going to do in the order of worship. So, in that envelope is a sum of money. There's $110. And that is significant because this month is our 110th anniversary, birthday, as a church. And so this money was given specifically for this purpose by a donor that chooses to remain anonymous. So this money didn't come from our general budget. This money didn't come from the proceeds of the sale of our campus. It was given specifically for this purpose, as an experiment for us to engage in over the next couple weeks and beyond. So you might be receiving that money and you might be thinking, my goodness, I'm so glad I have that. I didn't know how I was going to make it to the end of the week. And so the invitation for you is to use that money in your life as you need it to be used. Some of you might see that and think of a friend or a loved one that's going through a particularly difficult time, and you were wondering how they were going to help them, how you were going to help them. That might be an opportunity and an invitation for you to reach out to them and to provide assistance for them. For others of us, we might open that and see it and think, there's something that I've been wanting to try to see if I can make a difference with. And I was wondering how I was going to do that. That sum of money, that tool, might be the opportunity for you to do just that. So we're going to think about that and be present to that in the next couple of days. How creative can you be with this found gift, this found sum of money, to use it to meet some type of need, whether that's in your life or someone else's life or in the life of our community, in our world? And so here's the invitation to you. There is an ask. I said there wasn't an ask. There is an ask. As you think about that and as you utilize that tool this week, do this. Pay attention to how it feels to have that money, that tool, flow through your hands to someone else or to a need that you have. And what our ask is for you to tell us that story. So write a couple of sentences or a paragraph about how you chose to use that money and what it felt like to use that money for a specific purpose. That will be our work together over the next few weeks. Will you join me in prayer?